In the 1930s, the United States government made an extraordinary decision. It hired artists, thousands of them. It paid them a wage, gave them wall space in public buildings, and told them to paint American life. Honestly, specifically, the America that was actually there. Post offices, hospitals, courthouses, libraries, schools. Across 48 states, in every congressional district, the government commissioned murals for the places where ordinary Americans spent their ordinary days. The program was called the Federal Art Project. It was part of Roosevelt's New Deal, the same massive relief effort that built highways and dams and bridges. Between 1934 and 1943, the program sponsored roughly 4,000 murals. It employed more than 10,000 artists on government wages. It put art in places that had never had it, in front of people who had never been expected to look at it. And then, systematically, quietly, over years and decades, much of it disappeared. Some of it was painted over. Some was plastered into walls. Some deteriorated because nobody maintained it. Some was destroyed during building renovations. Some murals were rejected before they were ever installed, blocked because of what they showed, who they showed, and who they showed it to. The story of what the New Deal murals depicted is well documented. The story of what happened to them afterward is almost entirely absent from the standard historical narrative. That's what this investigation is about. Start with what the program was supposed to do. By 1935, the United States was in the 6th year of the Great Depression. Unemployment had peaked at 25%. Artists, like everyone else, were broke. Harry Hopkins, Roosevelt's relief administrator, was asked why the government should fund art when people were starving. His answer was direct. Artists, he said, have got to eat just like other people. The Federal Art Project was a work relief program. Its primary goal was to pay artists enough to survive. But its secondary goal, and this is the part that matters, was to document America, specifically the America of the Depression. Working people, industrial labor, agricultural life, racial communities, the full texture of a country under extreme stress. The government stipulated that mural subjects should depict ordinary American life in a realistic manner. Abstraction was prohibited. The work had to be legible to the people who would walk past it every day. What the artists painted when they followed those instructions was often uncomfortable, not by design, simply because the America they were looking at was uncomfortable. The first major confrontation happened in New York City in 1936 at Harlem Hospital. The Federal Art Project commissioned a series of murals for the hospital, the first major federal government art commission ever awarded to African American artists. The lead artist was Charles Alston, who in 1936 became the first Black American given a supervisory role in the entire Federal Art Project. Alston and his team, including artists Vertus Hayes and Georgette Seabrook, submitted sketches that did exactly what the program guidelines required. They depicted the local community and its history. Since this was a hospital in Harlem, they painted Black Americans, scenes of African history, scenes of Harlem life. A diptych showing the evolution of medicine from traditional African healing practices to modern American surgery, with Black and white physicians working side by side. The hospital superintendent rejected 4 of the proposed murals. The reason, stated in writing, was that the sketches contained, in his words, too much Negro subject matter. He added a second justification that has been preserved in the historical record, that Black Americans, he wrote, may not form the greater part of the community in years to come, so murals depicting Black life might become inappropriate. That sentence was written in 1936 at Harlem Hospital. In Harlem, the artists fought back. The Harlem Artists Guild and the Artists Union sent letters of protest to New York Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. and directly to President Roosevelt. The controversy was covered in the press. The hospital commissioner eventually reversed his decision, ruling that the murals contained, in his words, no offense to Negroes. The murals were installed. Alston's panels, Magic in Medicine and Modern Medicine, went up in the Women's Pavilion. Hayes's 8-panel mural, Pursuit of Happiness, went up in the main corridor. Georgette Seabrook's Recreation in Harlem went up in the nurses' recreation room, though hospital officials required her to add white figures to the composition before they would approve it. And then the building changed. Renovations happened. Decades passed. The murals deteriorated or were obscured behind plaster. Some had all but disappeared by the 1980s. They were rediscovered during a campus modernization project in 2004. 68 years after Alston painted them, hidden in the walls of a building that no longer knew they were there. The Harlem Hospital case is the most thoroughly documented, but it was not an isolated incident. Across the country, local officials, postmasters, building superintendents, and community leaders objected to murals that showed the wrong things, and in a significant number of cases, those objections succeeded in altering, removing, or blocking the art entirely. In Aiken, South Carolina, a mural by the artist Stefan Hirsch, titled "Justice as Protector and Avenger," caused an extended public crisis. The figure of justice in the painting was described by local residents as appearing to be a mixed-race woman, what newspaper accounts of the time called, using the language of the era, a mulatto. In the Deep South of the 1930s, the notion of a racially ambiguous figure representing justice was not a neutral artistic choice. It was an accusation. Local opposition was intense enough to be documented by the government officials overseeing the program. In post offices across the South, murals that depicted integrated scenes, black and white workers side by side in fields or factories, were rejected, modified, or replaced before installation. The section of Fine Arts, which administered the post office mural program, carefully monitored designs at every stage and sometimes required artists to alter their compositions to meet local standards of acceptability. A mural in Plymouth, Michigan by the Cuban-born artist Carlos Lopez, called Plymouth Trail, was unusual for explicitly depicting the costs of industrialization. An unhoused family huddled by a train depot, identical houses and smokestacks replacing an open landscape. Where most post office murals offered idealized images of agricultural bounty and American progress, Lopez's work invited the viewer to ask what had been lost. The building is now a grocery store. Shoppers select plants and eat lunch beneath Lopez's mural, which continues its complicated relationship with the category of public art. Then there was the most famous case of all, not a government commission, but directly connected to the same period and the same questions. In 1932, Diego Rivera, the Mexican muralist, whose influence on an entire generation of American mural painters was enormous, was commissioned by Nelson Rockefeller to paint a mural in the lobby of Rockefeller Center in New York City. Rivera painted a figure he identified as Vladimir Lenin. Rockefeller demanded it be removed. Rivera refused. The mural was destroyed, covered over, then demolished entirely. In February 1934, Rivera was paid his full fee and dismissed. The space was eventually filled by a different mural, by a different artist, showing an idealized image of American industrial progress. It is still there today. Rivera's lost mural was documented in photographs before its destruction. Those photographs are in the archives. The replacement mural is in the lobby of 30 Rockefeller Plaza. The choice of what to put on a wall and what to remove from it is always a statement about what a society is willing to see in itself. By 1943, the Federal Art Project had been shut down. The official reason was wartime budget priorities. But the political pressure had been building for years before the war. Conservative critics in Congress had been attacking the program since the late 1930s, arguing, with very little evidence, that it was being used to spread communist propaganda. Artists were required to sign loyalty oaths. Foreign-born artists were dismissed. The program was defunded incrementally, then eliminated. In slightly less than a decade, it had produced roughly 4,000 murals and more than 100,000 other works of art. The question of what survived and what didn't is not random. The murals that depicted the most idealized, least challenging versions of American life, harvest scenes, frontier mythology, civic pride, tended to be maintained. They fit the walls they were painted on. Nobody objected to them. Nobody plastered over them. The murals that showed something real, poverty, labor conflict, racial integration, the actual texture of Depression-era America, had harder fates. They were the ones that faced objections during installation. They were the ones that deteriorated quietly, behind plaster, in back corridors. They were the ones that were lost during renovations because nobody had thought to preserve them, or because somebody had thought to do exactly that. The 1935 Artist Guidelines had asked for honest depictions of American life. What survived, overwhelmingly, are the dishonest ones. This is the pattern this channel has been documenting since the first investigation. The Chicago fires of 1871 were documented, but the documentation that survived was selective. The 1890 census was destroyed, but the decision to destroy it was made by people who controlled the records. The orphan trains moved 250,000 children, but the records that would have allowed those children to find their origins were never fully kept. The New Deal murals were painted, but the murals that survived into the 21st century are the ones that showed what the people in power were comfortable with the public seeing. What the archive shows, when you follow it back far enough, is not conspiracy. It's something more fundamental. The people who control the walls decide what goes on them. And when what goes on them becomes inconvenient, the walls get painted. The art that made it through is still there. In post offices, in hospitals, in courthouses and libraries across the country. Most of it unlabeled. Most of it unannounced. Most of the people who walk past it every day have no idea it exists or what it costs to put it there. And some of it is still under plaster, in buildings that have been renovated 3 times since it was painted, waiting for someone to knock on the right wall. That's what the archive shows. That's what we follow. There's one more thing worth saying before the end of this investigation. In 2004, workers at Harlem Hospital broke through a wall during renovation and found murals they didn't know were there. Alston's panels, Hayes' 8-panel history of African American life, Seabrook's recreation in Harlem, hidden for decades, still intact behind the plaster. In 2018, the restored murals were moved to the new Harlem Hospital Center's Mural Pavilion. They are now the centerpiece of the building. National treasures, the historical record calls them. Recognized finally as exactly what they were, some of the most significant public art in American history. It took 68 years. The Public Design Commission, which oversaw the restoration, actually questioned whether it was appropriate to display the murals so prominently, given that, historically, they had been located largely out of public view. A surviving son of one of the artists testified before the commission. He said it was not only appropriate, but the correction of an injustice to have hidden them in a back corridor. The commission agreed. The murals were installed at the front of the building. This is how the archive works at its best, not just documenting what was hidden, but making the case that it deserved to be seen, that the hiding was the aberration. That visibility was always the point. The Federal Art Project asked artists to paint American life honestly. They did. What was hidden from public view for decades wasn't a failure of the program. It was the program working exactly as intended, and then being corrected 68 years later by people who understood what honesty costs and what it's worth. At Redacted Century History, they forgot to delete. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. The full source list for this investigation, including the Cambridge Core Study on Charles Alston and Harlem Hospital, the Living New Deal database, the National Postal Museum's documentation of the section of Fine Arts, and the FDR Presidential Library's art collection is in the description below. The walls are still there. Some of what's on them is still visible. Go look.